guest lecturer here with the Anglo-based Midrash of Harish. Those of you who are new, welcome. Those of you who have been here before, welcome back. A few more people will probably be joining us over the course of the evening. We're very punctual and on time in Harish, as you can see. Very quick plug. First of all, I want to say thank you to Cindy and Leil for again opening their home and welcoming us in. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's a real, may you be blessed, may you be zocher to continue hosting things and Torah in your home. It's very important, and to grow the Harish community. As usual, Baruch Hashem, we've had amazing events happen. We've got amazing events coming up. We had an amazing Purim Suda, over 80 people in attendance in here in Harish for the Anglo community. Fantastic. And this coming week, as usual, we have Women's Learning, Popcorn and Parasha with Sherelle Korobkin for women at our home, Rakefet 15, apartment 9. And every Shabbos afternoon, now with the new Sha'on, with the Sha'on Kai, it's a summer clock, we're going to be meeting 5 p.m. B'ezrat Hashem every week at Reshit Tabarto. We're doing Surah Rabbanan. Everybody is welcome, sources in English and Hebrew. After, yes?
You said it's everybody on Shabbat?
Shabbat afternoon, 5 o'clock for men.
For men.
For men. The women's is Wednesday evening, and then Shabbat afternoon is for men. So we're Ramadan. After we finish the Shiur, B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to be having Ma'ariv, so please don't run away. There are snacks over there, and the bathrooms at the back for those who need. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Josh, who's going to introduce our speaker for tonight.
Okay, so we're going to do a chain. Josh has introduced me, I'm going to introduce someone else, and everyone's going to introduce everyone else until we get to Rabbi Grossman. The Rambam in the 8th parak of Hilchot Hametz U'Masah describes the order of ceremony for Leil Pesach, Leil HaSeder. And in his distinctive style, the Rambam presents it as it should be with the Korban Pesach at the center. And only when he's done that does he say, and by the way, we don't have that now, and this is what we do. And this was a unique and distinctive mindset and approach of the Rambam, seeing Torah as it should be practiced in the ideal setting, despite being in Galut, despite that not being the reality of his time. And I think this is a mindset that Rabbi Avi Grossman shares, and I've got over there a copy that I bought for myself, but Rabbi Avi Grossman has produced this Haggadah HaPesach in both English and Hebrew, which contains the Haggadah with additions for what we would say if we had a Korban Pesach, with various instructions, various elements of content, things that we would do and we would say, as well as many discussions at the beginning about various aspects to do with Pesach and Korban Pesach. Rabbi Avi Grossman, I'm delighted that Rabbi Avi Grossman has come to Harish to speak to us. Rabbi Grossman is the former director of the Torah HaSeder program at Yeshivat Ramot in Yerushalayim, and senior and the former senior
project. We finished the Tanakh, so until they start translating the Rambam, it's going to stay former.
The Steindalt Center's Tanakh publication project, and has also been giving weekly shiurim for Machon Shilo on Hilchot Beta Bechira. I don't know if Sha'on Kayetz is going to affect that.
We have to find a better time now.
And so I'm very pleased that we're able to welcome Rabbi Grossman to come speak to us.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted actually to meet some real people. Like I said, it's also good to meet Yeshua and Yeshua. I know that at least Yeshua, with whom I have had dealings with and who arranged for me to come here, has done a lot also for Machon Shilo, getting the message out, upping our views, which is important because sharing the Torah. I speak only on my behalf. I know Rabbi Bar-Hayim has taken a lot of public positions, and he's taught us many things, but I'm not his spokesman, so if I say anything, that's strictly my opinion, might not be what his opinion is, and actually we've had some pretty interesting technical disagreements, which I guess that'd be a shiur for some other time, but it's not for tonight, but maybe, God willing, if we stay here for like 5 hours, maybe we get to this. I remember back in yeshiva in New York, we used to have Shabbatot yeshiva. And what was that? Well, we said Shabbos in yeshiva. That was really Ashkenazic there. And it was actually quite comfortable there in Queens. The food was good, and a lot of guys liked staying in yeshiva for Shabbos. There was a whole group of fellas who were out-of-towners, I would say. They were non-New Yorkers, and they were there practically every Shabbos, and they were comfortable there. And there's one other guy who was also a real out-of-towner, but he never stayed around for Shabbos. He would always put himself or try to go somewhere, or even when he was around in Queens, he would go somewhere else. You know why? He told me, because he didn't want to feel comfortable in yeshiva. Why? He wanted to push himself to get married and do something with himself. Some guys that stay in yeshiva, they don't know what they're missing. They're comfortable with the bachelor life. I couldn't sympathize. I was the only guy who was actually local. My parents lived 2 blocks away. That's how I ended up there. But I can understand how some guys, yes, you shouldn't be comfortable the way you are. And sometimes we have to take ourselves out of our comfort zone and realize what it is we are lacking. I prepared this source sheet over here at Yeshua's request because I wanted to show us that we're actually missing something. And that something is happiness, or I don't know, maybe there's a different way to translate it. It's the commandment to lismoach. Now, lismoach, I wouldn't translate that so easily into English. Why? Because most basically, liot sameach means to be happy. But when it's used in the Torah, it means more like to celebrate or to rejoice. And we're going to see that it's always used in one specific context. Now, when I say Torah, I mean the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. I do not mean the rest of Tanakh, which is kind of interesting because in the rest of the Tanakh, it takes on a whole new meaning, the word simcha, which also is a whole nother shiur. Let's look at a few examples, or actually every single example you could find in the Torah where there is an imperative commandment. Okay? It uses an imperative form to celebrate. Sometimes it's written in the plural, sometimes it's written as singular. And we'll notice that only once is it in any book of the Bible but Devarim, Deuteronomy. There's once in Leviticus, that would be Vayikra, and the rest are in Devarim. And we'll notice soon that they all occur in a specific context. The plural is usmachtem. The singular would be wasamachta, not wasamachta. Wasamachta would be the past tense. Wasamachta, don't forget, proper Hebrew grammar. It's a future tense, so we accent the first syllable and the last syllable. The first one is talking about the commandment to take the 4 species. And there we have it, usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem shivat yamim. What does that mean? And Rambam brings here, that's the next paragraph, he says, it means that there is a commandment to celebrate before the Lord, specifically in the temple, for 7 days. You're supposed to take this bundle on the first day. That's throughout the world, basically. The entire commandment to take the lulav bundle is but for 1 day. But in the temple, there's a commandment to do so all 7 days of the festival. The first 7 days, at least, if you count the 8th day as part of the festival. And that's what I bolded over here. That is what I'll say. So you see that there's a commandment when it says to celebrate, you do it specifically in the temple. Nowadays, you can ask me, wait a minute, I took the lulav on Chol Moed. Yes, you did. That's a later rabbinic enactment. And as you know, the one quite well-known position is that the Rav has said that when that first day of the festival is on the Sabbath, you should take the lulav everywhere in the land of Israel. And that's not the usual practice, as you may or may not be aware. That's another thing we should check out before Sukkot. The next instance is in Dvarim, and it says that a person should bring his various types of offerings to the temple. It says, Trumoth yedechem, nidrechem, nidvotechem, bikoroth bekarchem, etzonechem, and eat them there, while chaltem sham, lifnei Hashem Elokechem, usmachtem b'chol mishlach yedechem. You should celebrate with all that you have achieved, mishlach yedechem in this case. Next instance also refers to the Beit HaMikdash, v'yom hakom asher yivchar Hashem Elokechem bo l'shaken shemo shama taviu et kol asher Anochi mesaveh etchem. That place that God shall choose, that's where you bring everything you've been commanded. Olotechem v'zivchechem, ma'aserotechem, u'thrumatechem, l'chol mivchar nidrechem. And the next pasuk says, Usmachtem l'fnei Hashem Elokechem, atem v'nechem v'notechem. Then you should celebrate there. He continues this theme. Ki l'fnei Hashem Elokecha tochelenu, v'makom asher yivchar. And the pasuk once again concludes with, V'samachta l'fnei Hashem Elokecha, l'chol mishlach yadecha. The same thing with regards to Maaser Sheni. What does it say there? A person has to redeem the Maaser Sheni if he can't actually bring the fruits themselves, and use that money to purchase food and drink, once again, the place God shall choose, and it says, V'samachta toveitecha. You see there's a theme going on here. It says that where do you eat the Maaser Sheni? It's not necessarily in the temple. As a matter of fact, you're not supposed to bring Maaser Sheni to the temple. Where are you supposed to eat the Maaser Sheni? Anywhere within Jerusalem. So this is yet another example that we haven't seen in previous Shiurim, where the Rambam says what Chazal say, that you're supposed to eat the Maaser Sheni within Jerusalem. Why? Because that's B'makom Asher Yivchar L'Shakein Shemo Sham. Normally, that's just the Rambam says a general term for the entire Temple Mount, which he equates with the temple. But here, the Rambam is equating that entire place that God shall choose to domicile His name. That's all of Jerusalem. That is the Rambam L'Shitato. In a few places, he says that also. In case people ask you, where's the Mikdash? For certain dinim, it's Jerusalem, but for every din, it is the Temple Mount, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. There's also explicit instances in the Talmud where that is the case. He continues with the holidays. V'samach talif de Hashem Elokecha. That's referring to Chag HaShavuot. The next paragraph is Chag HaSukkot. V'samach ta v'chagecha and v'ita ach sameach. Someone tell me, what are we getting at now with all these things here? I want to put it all together. I'll skip the next paragraph over here. It says, "V'simachet ishto asher lakach." That's a commandment for a person to be free in his first year of marriage. But that's not, he should celebrate. That's, he has to gladden his wife. That's why it's in the PL. It's normally in modern he would have it more in a let's say, it shouldn't be in a hifiel form, but that's still the PL. The sameach means with a patah and a dagesh in the mem. It's not sameach with a kamas, which means be happy, which is the state of being happy. The sameach means to gladden others. So it's a commandment to gladden others, but not a commandment to actually be happy or to celebrate. And the last two of them is talking about, once again, bringing offerings to the temple. This is referring to the Bikurim. The Kohen takes the basket of Bikurim. It says, you should celebrate with all the good that the Lord has given you. And the last one is not referring necessarily to the temple, but the place where they're going to build a Mizbeach when there is no temple. Why? Because the second they crossed the Jordan River, and until they set the Machon Shilo, there was a Heter Mamot, as we've also discussed previously. There's no central altar. There is a central altar, but there's no central altar that obligates anybody, and they can bring offerings anywhere else. In this case, they were to build an altar right there when they crossed the Jordan River, and they're supposed to celebrate there. What do we get from all this? The second to last line, Hamuramehem, that whenever you have a commandment in the Torah to celebrate, it is referring to the sacrificial service, and more specifically, in the temple. That is a klal gadol in everything you see, and there's no other instance in the Torah where you have such a commandment. You could have challenged me, wait a minute, that would be this paragraph over here in Hilchot Yom Tov. I sit around sometimes on Yom Tov, it's the day of Shavuot, it's the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we keep the second day? Okay, let's say no. Not, the Rav also said, he's famously also said, there's no second day of Rosh Hashanah here in the land of Israel, the first day. What?
I'm not sure the name of the Rav is.
What?
I'm not sure the name of the Rav is.
Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Yes,
Oh, okay, so
it's-
Machon Shilo,
No,
head of
the whole
Machon
crowd
Shilo.
coming from Machon Shilo background.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Okay. This was WhatsApp, the Art DBH. So, on a day of Yom Tov, we celebrate. How do men celebrate Yom Tov? We eat meat, drink wine. Let's read the halakha very clearly what the Rambam says. There is no actual one of the big 613 according to the Rambam to eat meat and drink wine on Yom Tov. Here's what he says here. Shivat Yomei Pesach u'shmonat Yomei Achar Ayim Sha'ar Yomim Tovim. 7 days of Passover, 8 days of Sukkot, and the other Yomim Tovim. What's he referring to? Shavuot and Rosh Hashanah. Kulam Asri B'Sefet V'Tanit. Okay, you're not allowed to have eulogies and fast days on those days. A man is obligated on those days to be happy and of good heart. Him and his children and his wife, and the members of his household, and all his hangers-on basically. You shall celebrate on your festival. That's a singular, even though it has a segal there. If it was a plural festival, it would be with a yud. Even though really when the pasuk said it's referring to korban shlamim, a certain type of offering that's only in the temple, as we see in the laws of the festival offering. There's a sniff of the mitzvah. It's not an act. It's not one of the big 613. The 613th mitzvah is to bring shlamim in the temple and to eat of that. And if you don't have that in let's say beyond the temple, in Harish, if you're keeping Yom Tov in Harish, so what you'll have, you should eat meat and drink wine. I did not include how the Rambam describes that in the next paragraph. There he says, in the temple, when you have a shlamim, everybody has to eat their shlamim, even women. Women aren't obligated in all the commandments, but they are obligated in the simcha. They don't have to go al the regel, so they don't have certain korbanot, but they have a piece of some of other ones. And a man has to make sure that his wife has some of the meat of shlamim to eat also, so that she can partake of the simcha. Whereas outside the temple, let's say once again in Harish and in Haifa on Yom Tov, the simcha for men is eating meat and drinking wine, but for women it is not. What is it for women? What women enjoy: nice new clothes, jewelry, or whatever else makes them happy, and that's the man's obligation to make sure that he spends money on that. Men, take note. And for children, they say klayot egozim and ma'adonim. Once upon a time, klayot and egozim were not junk food, so you could give the kids the things they like. If you give them dried fruit, that's nothing bad. The problem is today, and this is also a public service announcement, but I think there's actually a mitzvah involved. Chazal said that to get children excited about the commandments, the holidays, the HaSeder, Torah study, that's why we have, I guess, the things that children like, ma'adonim. But nowadays we've done something terrible. We've created the ma'adonim. God only created candy and things like that in order to draw children toward the Torah. You were supposed to incentivize your children, only give them, let's say, the chocolate bar if they attend the Beit Midrash or they attend the synagogue or they do their homework, whatever it's supposed to be. You're supposed to incentivize them to the right thing. But nowadays, we give away these things way too liberally, so they have no reward, they have no incentive to earn anything because they get it anyways, and we've created these things out of poison. The processed sugar, which is ubiquitous now in these drinks and other things, is a harmful drug, and we're only beginning to realize this, and it should be phased out. And Ashrei me, who does not purchase any of these things to poison his own children. And seriously, you should. They get too much of it from school and from friends. Do not bring it into your house. You don't need it. Like many other things, you should not bring into your house, spiritual and physical. And instead, you should try to once again draw the children to the mitzvot by the way Chazal said. Give them the treats when they're specifically supposed to get it. Yes, sir.
You know, we get so much of it on Purim.
Yeah, too much. Yeah.
I don't see hamantash anymore. It's all.
You know, this is the first year I didn't have hamantash in my house.
Yeah.
And then I got some. I think my cousin, she made some hamantash. I received them, and it didn't have anything normal inside. It was just fancy stuff, lemon meringue and chocolate chips. And yeah, I have my own beliefs about hamantash, and it's very, very important. In this way, I also disagree with the Rav. He says with the holiday food, he's matir kitniot. I say, eat whatever your mother used to eat because that's what you're supposed to eat. That has the taste of the holiday. If you eat something else that you're not used to, you won't have that same taste of the holiday. If somehow you're eating your matzah with hummus, that doesn't taste like Passover. It has to taste like a macaroon. So no, but you understand. It's lacking a certain taste.
What's your thoughts on like the kosher for Pesach burgers and stuff? You know,
kosher
pizzas.
burgers.
All over Israel, there's all
the
this
fake
kosher,
bread.
all the fake bread and all
Yeah,
that
so
stuff.
that's
It kind of just eliminates the point of
Well,
Pesach.
that stuff doesn't taste like bread. You've probably seen it. The fake bread. Yoshua, you've heard my joke about the fake bread. I remember when I first seen it. The fake bread. Okay, say this. The fake bread. You ask me, what's the bracha on the fake bread?
That's not what I was asking.
Yeshana briot. Okay, that's the bracha on the fake bread stuff. It's really wrong. Chazal and the Rishonim talk about this. You can mistake it for the real thing because of at least the way it looks. It was a question. We all agree that yes. Let's take the position of just the Chai Adam as Ashkenaz as they come. The Chai Adam says Kitniyot Mutar Pesach.
So why do a lot of Ashkenaz not have it?
I do not know, but the etzem idea that the Rav has been affirming is true. The Chai Adam just says you have a chashash of certain ones that there might be wheat in there. So you have to either you could eat the stuff or just be careful, eat it dry. He says you can make matzah out of it. Don't eat it with water, or just triple check it. That's the only difference really. But
my understanding is from it's a minhag, and the minhag is based on halacha, because we have it, we don't know it.
Well,
The minhag is based on halacha that we don't know, it's been forgotten or we don't know.
it could be. That's why we're strictly against. We don't tell people to just say that like my mother, God bless her, say kitniot or chametz on Pesach. To say they say it's kitniot free. You don't have to worry. Ein chashash kitniot is we know that is a mistake because they're mutarot on Pesach. You just say I'm not going to touch rice or rice is a forbidden substance on Passover is incorrect. Even, like I said, even the Chayadim tells you how you can go about eating your rice on Passover. The Ramah even has room for eating rice on Passover. Okay? People are unaware of these things. We should be more aware of this. And the fake bread, the bracha after eating it is, of course, we should remember the bracha after you've done eating this fake bread on Passover. What's the bracha? No, the bracha achrona. What's the bracha achrona on something that's a shak? No, hagom. You survived eating that stuff. Okay, it's basically chemical. What is it? Chemical sandwich. So that's my opinion on the fake bread. It's wrong, the etzem, because it can confuse people. They won't understand that it's made to look like leavened bread.
I think it's wrong more because it just takes away from Pesach.
Yeah, whatever. Tastes al tam v'reach in litvakeach. That's a say. Some people like it. I was saying that tongue in cheek when I said eating hummus on Passover is not traditionally because it doesn't taste right. If you enjoy that, go ahead and eat that. That's fine. But I am trying to bring out a point here.
The problem with hummus is chometz.
Oh yeah, that's. I remember sitting. My wife has a large Sephardic extended family with whom I spent Passover, so I'm surprised at the things they eat and don't eat. I was expecting them to eat some matzah shira and some, just bring out the rice and beans and just eat that all up. But then there are things that they won't eat. So they tell me hummus because in Arabic it's the equivalent of a sad, so it's chametz and hummus. So I told them, in my house we don't eat meat on Passover. You don't eat meat because you flip over the M, you get a W, it's wheat. So if they could say that, I could say it. It's almost. You understand that once things have lost their meaning, so we don't make fun of these things because of that and say I do eat meat on Passover. But for people to say that once upon a time they avoided eating hummus because when the language they spoke, it sounded like chametz.
Well, that's why corn is not eaten, because the Yiddish word was the same as
grain. And corn is actually a corruption of grain.
To start in Kipti, I can't invite my family over, so my son, I'm not going to eat Kipti.
So, but I think this does bring out a point, and that is, we have to really understand what we're lacking. For many people, I could go a week without eating rice. I do not cook rice in my house on Passover despite the heter. I eat rice cakes or I eat popcorn, things that, no chashash of that. And I eat the things that my father they told him this is asur, but it turns out what's wrong with sesame seeds? They were traditionally not considered kidneyot for many years. So peanuts, like the Rav pointed out, Rabbi Shuli used to eat peanuts in his house on Passover. That doesn't bother me. I could go a week, I could go 2 weeks without eating a particular type of food, and it doesn't bother me, right? You go the people the 9 days they don't eat meat. Oy gewalt, there are so many people having a tragedy, right? So you didn't eat meat for a week. From Shabbos to Shabbos you didn't eat meat. Was it so bad? Okay, I don't know. I guess some people are immature about that. But you know what you are missing? If you look at this, you see something here. You know what mitzvah we haven't had? And you know what bothers me about the simcha aspect? Is that it says at the bottom, there's one implied commandment, like the Rambam says. You're supposed to get to the height of simcha when? Anybody know? It's the Rambam at the end of Hilchot Shofar Sukkah Lulav. The Rambam says Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the celebration that they did in the temple, the nights of Chol Moed, when they would draw the water for the Korban and Misuch HaMayim. And it says that was the real Simcha. That was the height of Simcha, once again, in the temple. And it says the Tochacha comes upon the Jewish people because they did not serve God b'simcha tuv levav. Implying in the Tochacha that really you should have been serving God all along with happiness. There was no commandment in the Torah until this point to be happy unless it was at the temple. And then, in conjunction with the destruction of the temple, suddenly we have, you should have been happy all along. Now that's kind of interesting. I would have expected, especially for people with a slight Hasidish bent, Bressivers, you have mitzvah gedola, lios besimcha tamid, like they sing. Who said that, by the way? Is that a commandment in the Torah? Is that Chazal said that? Who said mitzvah gedola, lios besimcha tamid? Rabbi Nachman said that. Rabbi Nachman died in the 1800s. So I would have expected something that was such an important rule. Right? Rabbi Akiva says, what's klal gadol b'Torah? V'afta l'reacha kamocha. That's actually written in the Torah. We got that from Sinai. But this liot b'simcha tamid, I think to have one of the great Hasidish masters come down and finally just tell us this, that should have been obvious, is a little bit difficult. I would have expected it to be in there. And I believe the answer is, and that's why we're going to segue into the Haggadah, we have been lacking a few things now. My grandfathers were born into I'd say the height of the Galut, but it's the lowest point of Jewish history. My grandfather left Tsarist Russia in the pogroms that preceded World War I. My maternal grandfather was a Holocaust survivor and from Hungary. And he went through the worst of the worst. And they did not have half the mitzvot that I have today. There was no talk of Tchelet. There was no talk of settling the land of Israel. Those are pipe dreams for them. My grandfather tried to make it into the land of Israel afterwards. They stuck him in Cyprus, and eventually they couldn't get in. They went to Canada. Fine. My grandfathers, like I put out in the WhatsApp group today, my grandfathers didn't have proper karpas on the table at the Seder. You're telling me they have Korban Pesach? My grandfathers ate onions. What's wrong with using onions for karpas? What's wrong with onion? Because it's not really a bracha on it. An onion is not something a person picks up and eats. Onions are used for flavoring. You could barely say ha'adamah on an onion, but that's what they had. And of course, they didn't even have maror. In the bitterness of the European exile, which had its culmination in Auschwitz, which 100%, they didn't even have maror. What did they use for maror back in the day? My grandfathers?
Experience.
What?
Their experience.
No, they used horseradish. They had to have something on the table. They used horseradish. And as you know, horseradish is not one of the vegetables that Chazal described as being maror.
Well, that's what it is nowadays, isn't it? A lot of
No,
people use
no.
horseradish.
Well, that's because they're being traditional, but it's still incorrect.
What is lettuce?
Maror is referring to 5 herbs that they used to eat as part of their sandwiches. That in this land, classical land of Israel, and they put meat in bread, they would put certain types of greens to make it taste better. Dahainu, lettuce, endives, usual ones, chicory. Those are things that all grow in the land of Israel, native to the land of Israel. Lettuce here, as a matter of fact, you ever notice, when is lettuce not in season here in the land of Israel?
Pesach? I don't know.
No, it's always around. Okay?
Oh, fine. I thought
You have
this-
lettuce all the time. You know, we don't have to get shishit. Lettuce is there the day after they pick it. Okay? This is a normal thing here. Here in the land of Israel, that's another sugya that we're not going to go into tonight. God willing, we'll have some other time. It's fun to discuss these things. They didn't have proper maror. We do not appreciate the things that we're lacking. That's the problem. We're so detached. We don't even know what we're missing. There are people who, they don't know how to speak Hebrew properly. I remember davening in Chutz La'aretz. The guy said Baruch Hu, and he couldn't say the Lord's name properly because he doesn't have all the vowels and consonants in his lexicon. He doesn't have it there. So the Cholam sounds exactly like the way he pronounces the Kametz Yod. He doesn't realize the contradiction right there. He can't even say God's name. He accents the wrong syllable. He doesn't even know what he's missing. When you don't have the Beit HaMikdash, you don't even know what happiness is. Do we even know what it's like? Does anybody have a clue? Is anybody here alive who's kept these mitzvot? Has anybody here ever offered sacrifice in the Temple of Shlamim and eaten in on the holiday and celebrated with his family? Has anybody ever been able to share sacrificial meat with the Levi and the widow and the orphan and the impoverished person? Has anybody ever been able to do a mitzvah like that? Has anybody ever attended Simchat Beit HaShoeva? I remember the Rav said a few years ago, instead of doing, everybody does a zecher, Simchat Beit HaShoeva. They have these huge Rebbe's tishes, and probably at your shul they have something one of the nights of Chol Moed. That's great. Why don't we do the real thing? The real thing is the simplest mitzvah to do. You know why? What did Simchat Beit HaShoeva celebrate? The simplest sacrifice of the year. What is the simplest sacrifice of the year? A bottle of water. That's all it takes, a single bottle of water. Not even quantities. Simple Kohen taking a flask of water and pouring it on the altar. And for that they celebrated. That was the height of the celebration since First Temple times. A simple, and it's not a korban that doesn't even deserve specific, explicit mention in the Torah was the height of Simcha. Why? Why? What does the Rambam say there? Because you're doing what God wants. It's the height of Simcha. Today, at the yeshiva, one of the younger people asked me, what if you're a vegetarian, you don't want to eat Korban Pesach, how do you go about doing that? Aren't you hoping that religion will eventually evolve to the way the Rambam and Rav Kook imagined, that we will not have animal sacrifice? So aren't we just be happy with the situation is now?
That
We're not
something
supposed to.
they wanted?
Yeah, there's something that perhaps the Rambam says the sacrifice is just a concession. Of course, many Rishonim disagree with him. Read the Ramban right at the beginning of Vayikra, where the Rav gave a shir about this also very recently. But that's the Rambam's thing. Rav Kook has a lot to say about eventually we'll all be vegetarians, God forbid. No. But you understand?
It says that we're going to be, we're not ready yet.
We're not ready yet. So
Rav Tzvi Yehuda, he asked him if he could be vegetarian. He said, go learn shita.
yeah. So yeah, there were some people who achieved this level. The Vilna Gaon was a vegan every day that they said tachanun. The Vilna Gaon was a vegan, but then again, the Vilna Gaon eat meat on Shabbos. Okay, but just to show that this is the things we do. Talmid Chachamim doesn't eat meat or drink wine. Once a week is fine, but he doesn't say even on Shabbos I'm not going to. No, he doesn't. My point is that we're getting to this, and the young lady asked me today, the first speech, said, so why don't we just say we're happy with this if we have a Rambam ideal? And I said, well, I compare this to a loving relationship between husband and wife, because that's what the Torah compares it to, that's what the Nevi'im compare it to. When I wanted to learn how to make my wife happy, which I didn't really know how to do because I was just some yeshiva guy without sisters and no experience, you have to understand, your wife says she wants a particular type of flower, or she wants to go out to eat or do some particular something. You should listen to her and know what she likes, and then when birthdays and things like that roll around, give her what she's asked for. Don't try to be clever and say like, I'll try to do something that I want. Your wife's not going to like that. At least I don't. I'm thinking, just talking to myself here. But you understand, you have to know what your spouse likes if you want to keep your spouse happy, correct? Especially if your spouse said, I would really like for my birthday X, Y, and Z. You know what you should do? Get her X, Y, and Z. Don't be too smart. Just do what she wanted. And I said, I know maybe, God willing, there will be a time in history when we will no longer offer animal sacrifice. That will not be what's done, and Rav Kook has written extensively about this, and more recently they even put out things that he did not have published in his lifetime because they were censored, they thought it was too radical. These are also other topics for other shiurim. But Rav Kook was talking about an idealized time. For now, I want to have Korban Pesach. You know why I want to have Korban Pesach? Because God said so. If he put in the Torah and he commanded me to do it, then it must be that's what he wanted. I can't say, ideally we're not going to offer sacrifice of time and what the animals ever do, etc. We're not going to eat meat. But for now, we have a commandment to do Korban Pesach, and we have a commandment to eat of that Korban Pesach. You know what else? According to Rambam, it is the most important, I guess, or the most critical positive commandment of the Torah. Why do I say that? Rambam says, if you want to know what's a worse Avera, what do? How do you know which Avera is worse? When it comes to you have to sin. Which one do you do? What is the measuring stick for knowing if an Avera is bad or not? How bad an Avera is?
Whether it has a punishment or not?
Yeah, well, most Averas do have a punishment.
No, I know, one that you know of or one that you don't.
Well, most Averas you do know the punishment for. There's very few where we don't know, if any. So he says there's levels of this. He says in the Perush HaMishnayot of the Pirkei Avot, he says that the worse the punishment is, the worse the Avera. So Averot punished with death are worse than Averot that are punished merely with karet. And Averot punished with karet are worse than Averot for which one is punished with malkut. Means they whip him. Okay, so we have a hierarchy there. And among the death penalty, there's 4 different types of penalty with different levels of severity. So you can tell what is a worse sin by the severity of the punishment. But the Rambam says you run into a problem with the positive commandments. You know why? Because they don't really have punishments for people who neglect the positive commandments. And then people make their own value judgments or their own justifications, their own, like the Rambam says, tachbulot. You don't know what's worse. Some people say, like, this is a big mitzvah. They care about that mitzvah. And then it comes to other mitzvahs and they neglect those mitzvahs. And the Rambam says you don't really know what's an important mitzvah or not. But you do know about 2 mitzvot. Because most of the mitzvot, it's called bitul aseh. There's no punishment, there's no penalty for missing this mitzvah. If you neglected to do it, what are you going to do? So you're neglectful. But there are 2 commandments of the Torah for which there is a punishment if one neglects them. And those 2 are?
Korban Pesach.
No, not Tziduk. Korban Pesach and Milah. Which means, wait a minute, what's the punishment for a person who doesn't do Milah? He's cut off from his Milah. If he doesn't, it's the same verb. The verb that he's supposed to do with the Orlaz will also the same, is the verb they use for a person who does not do so. That's considered a person, that's like the worst person. He's removing himself from Am Yisrael. Yeah, correct.
Even though it wasn't really him, it's his parents who.
Well, no, it is really him because
He can make the choice once he's
when he
old.
becomes an adult, he has to make sure, and every day he has a commandment to make sure it happens. So it's not. Yes, it was the parents' neglectfulness, and a man is only considered as punishable when he becomes an adult and he misses his opportunity. So yeah, if you haven't, make sure you do so soon. Now, no, but there were a lot of Jews. This is what happened. There was a big deal when I was a kid. When the Iron Curtain fell, you heard a lot about a lot of people. They passed the test. They voluntarily, they grew up in Soviet Russia. Did Soviet Russia ever cease to exist, by the way? From reading the papers, I think
It's back.
I think it's back. Okay. Or it went to those hibernating. By the way, they willingly gave of themselves to keep the mitzvah. Korban Pesach is in the same boat. Of all the sacrifices, Korban Pesach is also punishable with karet. I'm not trying to say, so therefore get ready for Korban Pesach because you're going to get excised from your people. But you have to understand it's an important mitzvah that we don't know what we're missing. We don't know what simcha is supposed to be like.
What's the equivalent of Korban Pesach today, since we can't?
Korban Pesach.
No, I know, but like. we
No,
don't-
there is. You're
you
saying
can't
what we can't.
slice a
Yes, you
cow
can.
or
Yes, you
whatever.
can. No, it's not a cow. It's a goat or
A
a sheep.
goat on an altar. So
Yes,
what
you
do we-
can.
Where?
Now let's get into the nitty gritty of this. If you can't take a Haggadah because I have to sell these in order to cover the printing costs, and you need them, I'm going to convince you of something. You need this. You know why? Because you
I
are a
don't
Jew.
know about the.
No, let's say it very clearly. The commandment to offer Korban Pesach is still in force today, even though there is no temple. But I mean today, I mean that if Chas v'Shalom, the 14th of Nisan, rolls around and the temple has not been rebuilt, and we haven't made any progress. There's some in English, by the way. There's more in that box over there. If you want the English version, here, I'll take the English from that. Yeah, just hold on to it. If you want to keep it, just talk to me afterwards, okay? This is not. By the way, this is a non-for-profit enterprise.
Do you make the Korban Pesach every year?
So here's the story.
Nobody.
Come on. I have never achieved this mitzvah, but
You've tried.
it is more than clear that the halakha states that even though the temple lies in ruins, there is still an enforced obligation on the Jewish people to bring the public sacrifices. That's the Tamidim and Musafim. We are all obligated in all the korbanot as always. Nothing has changed.
Was that a mikdash even?
Even though the mikdash is still in ruins. And once again, look this up.
Korban Pesach is different than a lot of.
Korban Pesach, it's only different for all the korbanot in one way, and we'll get to that soon. We are obligated. Yes, it has to be a makom. There has to be a mizbeach, but even if the mizbeach is not there, so the place of the mizbeach counts. All we need is proper kohanim. These are facts, okay? Halachic facts. We are obligated to do this, and we just have neglected it. So you could say, yeah, in the Rambam's time, Rambam's son writes, Rambam went to visit the Beit HaMikdash, as he says, Habayit HaGadol VaKadosh, even though it was in ruins, and that's what he says. And his son says, you know how many people were there when the Rambam went to Harabayit? He was with a group of 4 people. Him, his son, and 2 other people accompanied them. That was it. 4 Jewish men alone on Harabayit. And I'm beginning to get more public about this. For many years on Tisha B'Av, there was but one Jew who was sneaking up onto Harabayit and praying. You know about those people now in the news. Raphael Morrison's people dressing up as Arabs and going to pray. 10 years ago on Tisha B'Av, for 3 straight years, there was but one Jew who was disguised as a guy who was going up there and prostrating himself on Harabayit and praying alone. And that was me. Okay? Before them. And I did not get caught because I went up with Western Goyim, people from Texas, Germany, people like that. I wore a polo shirt and a cowboy hat and some blue jeans. They didn't notice I was wearing just Crocs or socks. Like, why is this guy without shoes? And I carried a water bottle. Because what kind of frum Jew carries a water bottle on Tisha B'Av? And I don't hope to ever observe Tisha B'Av ever again. I'm looking forward to keeping Korban Pesach and the actual holiday of Pesach. But in the decades since, there have been more and more Jews who are waking up, especially younger people, and they've been flooding Harabayit, such that now, at the place of the temple, there are minyanim many times a day. Many times for the morning service and many times for the afternoon service. And that, what? You're able to daven now in Harabayit. Years ago, what they started doing was, they were davening while shuffling along and walking, and they were saying in different languages, and I asked the Rosh Hashiva who's there, it says, Chazal say, they call the prayer, what's the word, Chazal's word for the Shemona Esrei, the main part, prayer? They call it, and, the other word, prayer, Amidah, standing, because you have to stand still when you do so. And they were walking. I told them, it's a contradiction in terms that you're walking while saying the Amidah. You can't do that, you have to stay put. Eventually they got the right, there were so many of them, now they get to daven right, exact, the place of the temple, Shar Mizrach, and they're able to pray there. This is an amazing development in Am Yisrael, that we're able to do this. And they have Minyanim and Birkat Kohanim, they are doing it. For years they were saying the Kaddish in Hebrew. Why?
Oh yeah, because they didn't recognize it.
It's not recognized. Like Kaddish is, a certain sound. It's sound, but now they've gone back to Aramaic. They were very brazen about this. There's more and more people. Last year on Tisha B'Av, there were so many youngsters going up there that they're treating me like the old man. I'm kidding you. That's not funny. I was only 39. I have a few white hairs in my beard, but for a long time, a decade previously, I was the guy who was sneaking up there, didn't look any older, but now things have greatly improved. And I'm telling you today that if tomorrow, like the Vilna Gaon says, if tomorrow Am Yisrael said they want to do Korban Tamid, that would be the Geula. All it takes is enough people who are on board with this, and that's why I have to do this. So why do you need the Haggadah? Because when you show up at the Seder for Korban Pesach, for which you were obligated to do, you cannot bring your old Maxwell House or Art Scroll Haggadah because it tells you to do the wrong things. It's assuming Korban Pesach is not on the table. When Korban Pesach is on the table, you need this service, like the Rambam describes, which tells you to do different things and has different halachot. And you have to familiarize yourself with those halachot. If you come to the Seder, there are people who are excused. When we do Korban Pesach 3 weeks from yesterday, 3 weeks from Friday night, when we do the Seder, you will bring this Haggadah. I'll tell you what to do. Some people will still be exempt. Women who recently gave birth, and other people, for whatever reason, they have excuses. They will do a classic Seder back in Harish or in Tel Aviv or even in the new city of Jerusalem, like they did last year with their...
And he was on your show?
Yeah, with the Maxwell House Haggadah that Moses brought down from Sinai. But those of us who are going to be in the parts of the old city that are actually part of the old city and eating Korban Pesach will have to use this Haggadah because this is the service we're going to use, and it actually has nafkaminos, like I say, practical applications of halacha. This is a different service. The instructions here are different. There are different commandments with which we have to become familiar. The basic ones is that we have to purify ourselves before Pesach. And we have to even purify our hands right before we sit down to meal. We have to put our hands in the mikvah because we're going to eat kodashim. You know what's like to eat sacrificial meat? I don't know anybody alive who's done it, but we're looking forward to doing it this year. Because, once again, in order to do it, it does not take a lot. We already have all the technical things ready. We just need permission to do it, and enough Jews who are demanding that it happen. You are not going to have afikoman. My blessing is, I tell all of you, may God bless you that you never eat afikoman again in your life. Why is that a good thing? What's the afikoman? What's the afikoman? What is it? It's an extra piece of matzah you eat at the end, right? So that means you do not have Korban Pesach. So why is this a bracha? Because I'm blessing you that you will always have the Korban Pesach on your table, that you'll eat that, and you won't have to replace it with matzah. That's a great blessing. I don't know anybody who's lived to see a blessing, but it should happen to all of us, and it should happen to all of us this year. Never eat afikoman again. Just like you should never observe Tisha B'Av again. Okay, can you even think about that? When they print the calendars at the beginning of the year, you buy your calendar, your shul puts out a calendar, you already see that, Tisha B'Av, not only do they know what day of the year it's going to fall out, same day as Passover, it's always the same day of the week, they even tell you what time the fast is going to start and the fast is going to end. Baruch Hashem. It's like that Meshugana in Yeshiva who started learning Yoreh Deah, he got to the end. What's at the end of Yoreh Deah? What halachot are there? Avelut, morning. And he starts learning his Avai. He says, Bezrat Hashem, when I'm in Avelut, when I sit Shiva, I'm going to do it this way. He's a Meshugana. You don't look forward to these things. I want them to erase Tisha B'Av from the calendar. Now, it also should be said that Rabbi Bar-Hayim said that we're still have ways to go. Practically speaking, if you want to bet on this year that there will be no Korban Pesach, if you're a betting man, so the odds are quite low. Only because, from practical history, there wasn't one last year, so Chazaka, there isn't going to be one this year. There is going to be one soon. Just like we've seen that something on Tisha B'Av has become a time of prayer on the Temple Mount for all the Jews, and things have become better. One year in 1947, there was no state of Israel, no Yom Ha'atzmaut, and the next year there was. Things changed. In 66, there was no Yom Yerushalayim. In 67, there was. Things change. Things change quickly. And we're moving toward, and we're right there. I'll sit down so you can ask questions about this. Also, I don't want to take too much of your time because, that's not nice. But I strongly believe that Am Yisrael needs this Haggadah. I strongly believe that every house in Israel needs this Haggadah. And I'm not a salesman. It's not my job to go around telling people what they need to do or what I think they should do. But this is the thing about which I feel most strongly. And if we could get a whole generation of Am Yisrael to really want to do this, then Dayo. It would have been sufficient. Dayenu. So who wants to go? Anyway, a question. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Josh.
Okay, Josh. Okay, too many Joshes. I should have said.
So I see in the HaSeder with the Korban Pesach, before Magid, you have Hatzagata Pesach. Now,
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been appropriate to say that they would have actually eaten the Korban Pesach at the beginning because that was the centerpiece, and then afterwards would have been Magid?
So,
and as the son asking the question, saying, "Oh, tonight we ate or we eat," how would he know to ask that unless they had just eaten the Korban Pesach?
So your question is essentially on the Seder, as we pointed out in one of the footnotes. You could have said that, biblically speaking, the order in which we do all these commandments is not described in the Torah. We have to, and by the way, the sages tacked on a few commandments. The whole 4 cups of wine, that's a rabbinic enactment. The karpas is saying that the sages came up with a charoset. A lot of it has been instituted by sages, but at least the biblical commandments, of which there are 4, what are the 4 biblical commandments? To eat the Korban Pesach, to relate the story of Passover, to eat matzah, to eat baror, and technically to eat chagiga also. If it is there, that's an option. There's no actual order. As long as you get it all going, and perhaps you could create your own family structure. Chazal did institute a Seder, though. once they instituted it that you have to start with this cup of wine, and before you start eating the matzah maror and the Pesach, you have to drink a second cup of wine and finish the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, there's no questions now. Chazal said to do it in this order, and that's the order we're going to do it. And they had wisdom in why they told this order. That could be a whole nother shiur. But yes, you bring the Korban Pesach at this point, you do not eat it because the sages told you to wait to eat it. That's all. It's their enactment. I hope that answers the question. Yeah, yes, sir.
It has to be on the Temple Mount for the Korban, or can we do it on the Kotel or anywhere we can see?
Mamot question.
The sages do not recognize the Kotel as anything. That's the first thing. The Kotel is a joke that the Arabs foisted on us, and that's a whole other shiur. It is forbidden for Jewish people to offer sacrifice anywhere but the place of the altar on the Temple Mount.
Which
Strictly
doesn't
forbidden.
exist anymore.
No, it does. It's right there. It's right there in the middle of the Temple Mount. It's a big open space.
There's
And
the
you're
altar.
The altar
You're
has a
saying
thing
it's
that's
just
there.
the location.
The location.
Not the altar itself.
It's the occasion, and you should put an altar. There's a minimum size altar. We had a shiur about this. Really, the ideal altar is 32 by 32 amot at its base. And amot is basically 48 centimeters.
But there's
So that's a
location issues
huge-
as well.
Like
That's
the
a huge
size
structure.
of this room.
There's location issues.
Much bigger. What?
Location issues and
Location. Location,
How
location,
about
location.
it being,
Yeah, and paraduma is not an issue, even though we read about it this past Shabbat. Why? Because once the majority, even just the majority of the Kohanim, or the majority of the Jews, or the majority of everybody, or the majority of the Kilim, are contaminated with death impurity, which is not removable by mikvah, so you just go ahead with the service. Other forms of impurity are removed, for example, by immersion, and those forms of impurity do have to be removed. So all of us, men and women alike, are obligated sometime before Passover to immerse ourselves in the mikvah and be ready and stay pure so that we can eat the Korban the night of Passover. And because everybody is basically assumed to be Tamei Meit, we will not need to worry about the ashes of the red cow in order to purify ourselves from that.
That's
Yeah.
for Korban Shiur, not for the.
And for Korban Pesach. And for Korban Pesach. It's explicit in the halachot that that's the way it is. So we are not worried about this. Yes, ideally we should process a red cow now and have this ready and purify ourselves. But if we do not, that takes at least a week for everybody to get there.
Same thing that happened in Chanukah when everybody was impure, but they waited until they had the pure.
So that's the
wine,
pure
right?
oil.
Pure oil.
That's the thing. They waited to get more, but they did go ahead with what they had. It was a miracle that they had something. They had what they had. They preferred it, and they were able to do it. But for other things, they didn't. They offered sacrifice when they were in a state of impurity. They started the Korban Tamid. They rebuilt the altar. Building an altar, you can do an impurity. You know why? Because an altar cannot contract impurity. An altar is, technically speaking, a structure that's connected to the ground, that's made out of the ground. So it doesn't have an issue with that. So go right ahead and build a mizbeach, an altar. That's something we should do.
What is the minimum size of a mizbeach?
Yeah, so the minimum size is as understood as the mizbeach as described in Exodus, in Parashat Truma. It's the simple, 3 by 3 amas, and 3 amas in height, 1 by 1, basically. Very simple mizbeach as described. We hold like the sages who said that the actual height of that altar was 10 amot. But minimally, because it says 3 amot, so technically speaking, the Rambam says the ideal mizbeach is 10 amot high, 32 by 32 at the base. Minimal mizbeach is much smaller, much lower.
But
So we can do that.
But only the blood went on the mizbeach. The actual carbon.
And the entrails. Okay. So most of the Korban Pesach is meant for consumption. And that's what makes it different. This answers the previous question, a few minutes ago. All the sacrifices are altered in a state of impurity, except those that are meant to be eaten, like sin offerings. The meat thereof is taken out to be burned, not even eaten by the Kohanim and the Azarah. But the Korban Pesach, the Mishnah says, is meant to be eaten. And therefore, when we do it in a state of impurity, we still get to eat it, which is an amazing chidush. It's the only sacrifice in the current state that will be eaten. Tomorrow morning when they do Korban Tamid, and there are many people who are obligated today to bring sin offerings for whatever reason. There'll be a line of people bringing their sin offerings. The Kohanim will not eat any of the sin offerings because the Kohanim will be tamei. It'll take them at least 7 days to purify themselves. So all those sin offerings will go off and be burnt. And if they continue doing this up until Passover, all those sin offerings, etc., will be burnt. But the Korban Pesach will be eaten, and be eaten by everybody, which is the Baruch Hashem. We didn't get into it this week. We'll talk about this maybe online. We'll do something soon. How Pesach is the great equalizer among Am Yisrael. It is the commandment that makes everybody into the exact same status: man, woman, even slave. We don't have any of those today, but the slave becomes like a free man. on Passover and eats just like his master eats, without exception. Any other questions about that? I'll sit back down again. No. I wish that I could invite everybody for Passover. One other thing that you cannot do, I'll conclude with this. You cannot invite people to Passover on Passover. No, there are some people, they catch people on the way out of shul on Friday night. They find that people have no play, no one, come join us. Stay with us for Shabbos Minyan Man, like Lenny Solomon used to sing. And there are people at the kotel. You go down, that's a thing. You go down in Kabbalah Shabbos at the kotel, and then there's always the usual Rabbanim who are grabbing people, come, willing to feed anybody. Korban Pesach, you can't do that. Oh, we used to have halach ma'anya. Anybody who wants, please, join us at the Seder. You can't do that the last bit on Passover. Passover is only available to those people who pre-registered. What does pre-registered mean? They knew they were eating this Korban before it was slaughtered. That is, when you sit down to the Seder, it's only those people who had already been enumerated, I guess on a list. It doesn't say they wrote it, but apparently it seems to be the case. They had to have it somehow registered, and only they get to sit around and eat of this particular Korban. You cannot bring someone in from the outside when Passover starts. If he has no Korban Pesach, he goes and has a Maxwell House Haggadah Passover with all the other people who are also not doing it. Well, no, you have to do it on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon. You have to do it before the festival starts. So when you sit down for Korban Pesach, you'll, let's say, do the sacrifice at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You're sitting down for your Seder at 7. You may not invite someone now. You have to close the door to them, unfortunately. Say only those people who pre-registered, and bring someone in. Him eating of that Pesach would be a sin. And you offering to eat of that Korban would also be a sin. You're not supposed to put a stumbling block before the blind. You'd cause them to transgress. So we have to begin to understand that Pesach, for all this about uniting the family and teaching your son what happened, remembering the bitterness of the exile, freedom, becoming free men in the service of God, you know who's left out? Those people who didn't prepare beforehand. Just like everything else. You have to, if you're not ready. Any other festival, if you didn't bring your sacrifice, so you could eat someone else's sacrifice. He can invite you to eat his shlamim. He offered a korban to it on one day. It's a mitzvah for him to share it with other people who do not have. But Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to share it. There's no mitzvah to share it with the person who does not have. He was supposed to get ready beforehand. Korban Pesach is the only one whereby if you're not ready already before Pesach starts, before Chag HaMatzot, as it's called strictly in Tanakh, that afternoon, then when night falls, you're too late. You missed the boat. So I'm asking everybody, don't miss this boat. We have to get this thing going as soon as we can. And I thank you for your time.
I think there's a WhatsApp group in Harish where there's.
Yeah.
I think there's a service online that you can with an Orat Kev. I think you can.
Orat Keva for Korban Pesach. You'll have to pay once though. I think someone has a scam going there.
If they do the Korban
every year.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now this is because this is not Torah. To purchase the Agadah, it's 1 for 60, 2 for 100. The English edition is a little bit more expensive, 90 shekels, but you save on postage. So if you want it, please take it and just tell me about it. I'll sign it for you. And once again, I thank Yehoshua for having us. It's wonderful to actually see that the land is growing and they're building new cities. That's also very important.
I wanted to say, to Rabbi Grossman for an amazing share, and I'm inspired over everybody else is. We're going to have a marriage now for those who want, and please feel free to purchase copies of Rabbi books. I'm getting myself a copy right now, but the one here, I think, so let's have a marriage and.
By the way, I also like to meet everybody. Shake hands, say your name. We're not afraid of this thing. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Which way do you?
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.